Hey everybody, welcome back. We are moving on to our next topic for Unit 1 as part of the Global Tapestry unit that we have started in the last class period. Today we're going to talk about developments in Dara Islam. And Dara Islam is just a way of saying wherever Islam was in the world, right? And there's a lot of places that you'll find Islam, which we'll talk about in this unit. But Islam itself mostly comprised in the Middle East, but also parts of North Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and even parts of Europe, mostly the Iberian Peninsula. So today, the essential questions that I want you to be answering and the stuff that you want to pay attention for as far as how we go across the course of this lecture is number one, identify and explain the political changes that were occurring in Dara Islam in the period of 1200 to 1450. And then two, identify and explain the cultural and technological advances and transfers made in Dara Islam in the period of 1200 to 1450. So these are pretty simple, straightforward, identify and explain response questions. All right, so let's build some context here. And so in Unit 0, we briefly talked about this a little bit, but the uh, religion of Islam is one of the newest, at this point in history, major religions that is in the world. And it follows the death of Muhammad, who is the prophet within the Islamic belief system. And so when he dies, the people that take over as the head of the faith certainly promote the spread of Islam, and through trade and as well as military expansion, there is a very fast moving and fast spreading religion of Islam, starting right after Muhammad's death, across the Middle East, across North Africa, even into the Iberian Peninsula of Europe. And so that's something that kind of happens for a while. And this all occurs a lot during what was known as the Umayyad Caliphate. And the Caliphate is basically an Islamic word, and I'm really oversimplifying this, but Islamic word for like kingdom. And so the Umayyads were the dynasty of rulers that ruled early on, but eventually they will lose their power, and a new dynasty will come in, a new caliphate, and that is known as the Abbasids in 750 AD. And when they replace them, they are going to do a lot of things that are going to promote the spread of Islam, but also the promotion of trade and other advancements that we'll talk about a little bit more in this lecture today. But the Abbasid Caliphate, that time period, is considered the golden age of Islam. It's going to reach its heights. And while Europe was largely in a dark age and sometimes of the Middle Ages, Islam was thriving as far as its technological innovations, a whole bunch of trade and so forth. So that's one thing. The caliphs, which were the rulers, they're both the leaders of both the state and the religion and the faith, right? And so their word is supreme in a lot of ways, and they use Sharia law, which is essentially the law that is established by Muhammad, and so. The word theocracy is something that you could make the argument that this is a theocratic order in which the religion and the state are one and the same. And so the religious laws of Islam were the same as the laws of the land. But as we're going to talk about today, during the 12th and 13th century, the Abbasids are going to face a number of invasions, including the Europeans who will invade during the Crusades as they try to regain control of lands that are considered sacred to Christianity, and then other lands as well for the economic purposes too. And then also they are going to be invaded by nomadic peoples of Central Asia, to which also will include the Mongols, which we'll talk about the Mongols more in depth at a later time in the next unit. But yeah, they're dealing with some external issues, and they've also got some internal issues at the same time going on. And so here's kind of your overview provided by Ben Freeman and just the places we are going to talk about and the people that we're going to talk about, um, and so forth. Okay. All right. So moving on, as far as the curriculum goes, the development of ideas, beliefs, and religious illustrates how groups in society view themselves, and in the interactions of societies and their beliefs often have political, social, and cultural implications. And that's a very big umbrella of a lot of things we can say. So let's narrow down the focus a little bit more specifically to the Mideast, right? Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, the three major religions that could say that their cultural hearth is in the Middle East, in this region. They continue to be huge influencers that shape both the societies of the lands of Dar al-Islam, as well as Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and so forth. So, as far as the Middle East region itself, like I mentioned, the cultural hearth of Judaism, Christianity, Islam is all there, right? And it's a big reason why the city of Jerusalem is such a highly coveted city by Christians, by the Jewish people, the Israelites, as well as Islam. Um, they view that city as a sacred space for each one of those religions. Jerusalem is where Jesus Christ taught and was crucified. For the Jewish religion, is it's kind of their original homeland, and for the Muslims and people of Islam, they believe that is where Muhammad ascended into heaven. So all three of them have very strong ties to this area. In Dar al-Islam, when the Umayyad and the Abbasid caliphates ruled over those lands, they would allow the practice of Christianity and Judaism to continue. They did not force them to uh, convert to the religion, but they did make it so some sort of incentive for them to want to uh, join the religion as well. And so, if you wanted to continue to practice Christianity or Judaism in Dar al-Islam, you had to pay a tax known as the jizya, and that you paid this tax, and that allowed you to have that religious freedom. And then, if you were Muslim, you did not have to pay this tax because you are already a member of the faith. So this is something that occurred and will continue to occur in the Middle East for some time, and we'll bring the jizya up quite often. But it's one example of how the faith of Islam influences this area. And I should also mention, and for those of you who do remember going back to AP Hug or Core Geography, the five pillars of faith of Islam really also play a role in what are some of the things that occur, events that occur, and some of the behaviors that happen culturally, politically, socially, economically. These are things that are heavily influenced by the religion. For example, like the idea of the Hajj. The Hajj being a religious pilgrimage that would require that all those who are able to make a trip to Mecca, the cultural hearth of the faith of Islam, is where Muhammad taught. And they go through the kind of the steps that Muhammad went through in this Hajj. And so this promotes people to move around, to travel, to get outside of the lands in which they were born. So that's really important to note. Alms, giving alms, essentially giving money to the religion as well, heavily influenced. So those are some things that the five pillars and the requirements of the being a member of the Islamic faith, a Muslim, really influences the day-to-day occurrences that occur in Dar al-Islam. So, moving on to something that's more of the government theme of this unit. As the Abbasid Caliphate fragmented, new Islamic political entities emerged, most of which were dominated by Turkic peoples. These states demonstrated continuity, innovation, and diversity. So there are some continuities, some things continue as these political entities break off from the Abbasid Empire, but they also have some new innovations and new ways of doing things as well. So let's talk about some of those examples here. So the first example, this is an illustrative example. So this is one that's provided as College Board being, they want you to know this, right? Seljuk Turks, they are coming out of Central Asia, and the Seljuks, were a tribe of the ethnic Turks themselves. They descend from military families, military leaders, and they kind of split off from the Ugus, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, Turks. But they would convert to Sunni Islam, and Sunni Islam. Just to background on that, it's one of the major branches of the Islamic faith. It's the one that has the majority of Muslims are Sunni. There's also the other big one, which is Shiite. But in the world today, about 90% of the Muslims in the world are Sunni Muslim, and only about 10% are Shiite Muslims. So in the 11th century, they are going to be invaded their territory under the control of the Abbasids. They invaded territory, I should say, that were under the control of the Abbasids. And so when they did that, and the Abbasids were kind of a weakening faction anyway, and so they're wrestling the control over this land from the Abbasids. And even though they share the same religion and they still, take a lot of the marching orders, I would say marching orders, that's a bad way of saying it. A lot of the direction of the religious ideas from the Caliph still, as far as control over the state and the land itself, they are starting to take control. And in doing so, the Seljuk Turks are going to put in place new leadership and new leaders, and they are known as the Sultans. And so they usurp the state power away from the caliphs, but the caliphs still have a lot of influence as far as the religious aspect goes. So unlike the Abbasids, the Seljuks also limited Christian pilgrimage, and they did not allow the free movement of Christians into their lands, in particularly their own pilgrimages to Jerusalem to go walk the steps of Christ and things that happened during that time period. This is going to play a major role in why the Crusades do end up happening. And so when Pope Urban II, who will be the Pope of the Catholic Church, calls for this crusade, he does so because the head of the Eastern Orthodox religion and the Byzantine Empire calls for help because they're under invasion from the Turks. But the concern was that if they do ultimately gain control of those lands, then they won't be able to have pilgrimages. And so then there's a lot of other reasons why the Crusades happened, but that is one reason why that the Seljuk Turks' control of that territory and why it promoted the idea of having crusades. Another faction that kind of breaks away from the Abbasids is the Mamluks Sultanate of Egypt. And the Mamluks were slaves. They were slaves that were brought in by the Arabs. And they were probably from Central Asia, probably a Turkish tribe themselves and such. But when they were enslaved, they were trained to be bureaucrats. They were trained to have specialized abilities to be able to run a centralized government. They were trained as soldiers, and they had advancements for opportunities for advancements, I should say. And so that is something that really is kind of, they were given the tools to be able to rule themselves if that time comes. And so as the Abbasids were beginning to lose power and control over the centralized government, the Mamluks kind of break away and they seize control of a sizable territory that includes the lands of Egypt, some parts of in modern day Israel and Lebanon and so forth. And so they become very prosperous as they break away from the larger Abbasid Caliphate. And they're in a prime position to be able to benefit from the trade that goes through this region. You've got the Red Sea here, which gets you out to the Indian Ocean trade networks. which we'll talk about a little bit later. You got all the access to the Mediterranean trade networks, which were massive and moved lots of materials and so forth. So because of that, they became somewhat of a go-between between Europe and the East and so forth, and the Islamic world. So the Europeans would trade with them for things like sugar and cotton. And sugar, the Europeans couldn't get enough of. So those are some things that what made them so powerful and wealthy during this time. Another faction that breaks kind of away from the Dar al-Islam is the Delhi Sultanates. And so we're moving over to South Asia, which is India. And they are going to, another group of Mamluks are going to invade into South Asia over time, starting in the 9th century. So it doesn't all happen at once. It's over time, these invasion, this large movement of Mamluks into South Asia. In 1192, Muhammad of Ghor establishes a Muslim state inside South Asia. And remember, if you remember from Unit 0, I don't know if I actually did mention this, but the South Asia is primarily made up of people of the Hindu faith. And so here we have a new religion that's coming in, and they're starting to challenge the belief systems of the Hindus and so forth. And there's a lot of appeal for many people of the Islamic State and Islamic religion comparatively to Hinduism, where Hinduism has this very strict social caste system. And the idea for social advancement wasn't always there. They look at Islam as being a more opportunistic religion in many ways. And so a lot of people start to convert. In total, there were 5 dynasties of the Delhi Sultanates, I should say. And like many other Muslim states, they kind of fragmented from the caliphate, and a sultan would rule over the land. It would not, just like we talked about the Seljuk Turks, they controlled the land and the state of the Delhi Sultanates, but they still very much were influenced religiously by the caliphate itself. And because they are blending the religion and the culture of both the Islamic world and the Hindu and South Asia world, you have a period of time during this is referred to as a Indian cultural renaissance. And so you have lots of different types of architecture, literature, and so forth that come out of this region. So Muslims ruled and continued to expand into parts of Afro-Eurasia due to military expansion, and Islam subsequently expanded through activities of merchants, missionaries, and Sufis. So let's talk about them a little bit. Okay, so merchants and missionaries, right? Yes, you have it. You have the expansion of Islam through military conquest, such as the Sultanate of Delhi. That is undeniable, right? But there are so many people who do convert to religion through the activities of merchants and missionaries. Now, Muhammad himself was a merchant, and so the merchants themselves were held in a high regard in Islamic world and Dar al-Islam. And so when you were a merchant, you travel great distances to go and get products, buy products, sell products, and so forth. And in doing so, you're not just bringing commodities and goods, you're also bringing ideas and the faith and religion. And so you encounter people and you talk about your faith and religion, and that could become appealing to those you are doing business with. Not only that, where there are advantages to being Muslim and being connected to the vast Muslim trade networks. And so that is one way that it becomes more popular. And Islam itself is a universalizing religion, meaning that they believe that it has ideas and principles that could meet any culture and mesh with any culture in the world. Islam, just like Christianity and Buddhism, it spreads because they seek more converts. They seek to try to bring their beliefs because they believe that their way of life is a way that helps people, live life better. Uh, that's just essentially what universalizing religions do. So they travel along these trade routes. The Dar es Salaam is connected to the Silk Roads. They're connected to the Indian Ocean trade network. They're connected to the Trans-Saharan trade network. They're connected to the Mediterranean trade network. I mean, they're connected with everything. They're really become like the center of the trade world in many ways during the time at their height. Oops, sorry. And so because of that, as these different merchants travel abroad and such, you start to see the development of Islamic diasporic communities. These are communities in which, they move to different parts of the world, but they keep with them their old traditions and their religion. And so you will find these diasporic communities pop up in Southeast Asia. Indonesia, modern day Indonesia, the majority of people who live there today are still Muslim. um, Western China. You start to see a lot of, because of the connections to the Silk Road, there are a lot of Islamic people who practice Islam in China. And then you also find quite a few in places like West African empires too. So this is something that you cannot ignore the spread of Islam because of the activities of the merchants who also dual up as missionaries as well. Another group that really helps spread the faith of Islam into other places are the Sufis. Now, the Sufis were Islamic mystics, and so they practice Islam in the sense where they don't abide by the Quran in like a very strict manner. And they look more towards and they focus more on the spiritual bond with God, with Allah. And the one thing that makes them so successful in the ability to convert more people to Islam is that they could come into a place where and learn about the religions and beliefs of another faith or whatever, and they can kind of connect. Here are some of the spiritual things that go on in your religions, very much the same as we do in ours. And so they would be captivating to audiences who, as they, perform these artistic uh, dances and other forms of expression. One is kind of the spinning dancers, as you can see here in my little GIF here. And they you don't find them many places in the world today, but they just do this dance where they kind of spin and their heads are connected or they're straight, but they're kind of, as you can see here, and it's very fluid movement and it can be mesmerizing. And so, getting that type of attention and wanting to learn more about this is something that helps spread the religion. And they play a huge role in spreading the religion into South Asia, and finding more ways to connect the spiritualism of Hinduism with some of the stuff with Islam as well. Okay, so moving on, human adaptation and innovation has resulted in increased efficiency, comfort, and security. Technological advancements have shaped human development and interactions with both intended and unintended consequences. So, kind of get into the technology theme here a little bit. The one thing that the Muslim states and empires really did was they encouraged significant intellectual innovations and transfers. They promoted the idea of science and learning and trying to understand the world much more so, thinking that by doing so, they become closer to Allah. And so this is something that was heavily promoted in Islam, in Dar al-Islam in particular. So they make major advancements in lots of different areas. So we're going to focus on the illustrative examples here a little bit and talk about a few others. But one of the examples that you should know about is Nasir al-Din al-Tusi. And he was an Islamic scholar and mathematician, astronomer. He really was kind of a Renaissance man, as we kind of talk about in the West, Renaissance man, a man of many, many talents, right? And so some of the things that he accomplished while he was alive is that he built this observatory that would map out the stars and create astrological charts, the most accurate astrological charts to date in the world at that point. Some that would end up being used by the European explorers as they began to chart out the oceans to find new places to trade with, right? Um, so, he also, studied things that kind of helps create the triangles, help lead create to the foundations of trigonometry more so as we know today. Trigonometry started by the Greeks, but then he expands on it much more so in the treatises of the quadrilateral. So that's something that comes from the Islamic world. The math advancements were much a big deal in the world. And so like algebra, which, for me, I'm not a fan of algebra. I was never good at it. If you are, God bless you, you were just too good, right? But algebra, primarily comes from the Islamic world, and what a lot of the math that was created and the formulas and so forth come from the Arabic world. We even use a form of Arabic numerals as our numbering system. And so that gives you an idea of how advanced and how much influence the Islamic world will have on Europe over time. And so we use like those forms of Arabic numerals as well. And then, of course, they also, much of the arts and architecture that you see in the world today from the Islamic world really uses the geometry in their art a lot. Where in Islamic world, art doesn't really have a lot of people in it. You do have some, but it's more commonly we'll find geometric shapes as a form of art, as you can kind of see here, right in this bit here. They do have quite a bit of that in a lot of the mosques that were built during this time. All right. They also make huge advancements in literature because of the promotion of scholarship and writing and understanding. There's a lot of spread of the Arabic script, the Arabic alphabet. I don't want to say alphabet, but the Arabic script that is used. It is the script that's used in the Quran, their holy book. And then you also find it will spread to all parts of the Islamic world because it is the script and written language of Muhammad. So there's a lot of examples you can say here, but the one illustrative example that you want to know, and I promise you, I do not know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Aisha al-Bayunia, she was a Sufi mystic poet that was from Damascus, Syria. And what we learn about her, and she's kind of relatively new to the AP World curriculum, but she probably composed more works in Arabic writings and such than any woman prior to the 20th century. So she wrote lots of poems, including 101 Nights, where she has a lot of poetry. And I've personally never read any of it, but I have a feeling it's quite beautiful because it's still found in bookstores and places today. But and a lot of her writings are about introspective and trying to get to know God and grasp the understanding of God or Allah, so forth. Okay. Advancements in medicine. As far as advancements in medicine, I mean, Islam was years and decades and centuries ahead of where Europe was at this time. And a lot of it was a continuation of Greek medicine and beliefs and such. The Greeks had Hippocrates, if the Hippocratic Oath, he establishes a very interesting baseline for what understanding of the human body and medicine was at this time. And even though a lot of it's not considered correct today by Western medicine standards, it still was far more advanced than what you would find in Europe because as the Roman Empire had fallen in Europe, you lost a lot of that classical knowledge, and where it disappears in Europe for some time, it is saved in the Islamic world and then built upon at the same time. And so there are, the idea of the Aristotle's humors, that your body is made of these humors, the black bile, blood, yellow bile, and such. That's kind of the ideas of that. And I'm not as familiar with this stuff as I think I probably should be. But another example of the advances in medicines, the hospitals, the idea of a hospital was invented in Islam. And they had a very interesting way of like finding a way where they can best place to put a hospital, where it would be the healthiest place to put a hospital. And they would just take big hunks of meat and just hang it up in the town, and leave it up for days, and they would observe what happens to that meat. So if you had a meat in a part of the town where it becomes covered in maggots and it's just rotting like crazy, not likely the cleanest air to have a hospital. And so they find the place where had the least amount of rot and maggots and so forth, and determine that was the cleanest part of the city, and it's where you want to be able to put the sick people so they can recover. So the hospital was an Islamic invention, and one that has significant impacts to today. Other things, the cultural transfers. Muhammad, again, he promotes the learning of other cultures. And so, a lot of the Greek literary classics and philosophies of Plato and Aristotle were translated into Arabic. So they really were fascinated by Greek writings in the Islamic world, and they preserved a lot of them. They studied mathematics in India. They adopted paper making from the Chinese that helped, be able to write things down and ideas to spread more so. Another example that's not from College Board, but I think you should know it anyway. Ibn Rasheed, he created a number of commentaries on the works of Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. And he also developed the histograph. It's basically a study of historical methods, like how do we view history and how should we study history. His major responsibility in that itself. Okay. Here's something that you ought to know about even more so, as far as an example of the cultural and intellectual transfers that go on in the Islamic world. The House of Wisdom, found in Baghdad, in the height of the opposite empire. And the House of Wisdom was essentially an academy. It was a library. It was a center where scholars could travel to discuss with each other, to study, to read, to write. This was a pretty amazing invention. It was just this giant academy in which you have the most intelligent, intellectual people in Islam are coming to this centralized location and coming up with new things, making more observations. They had an observatory there as well. Sadly, it was destroyed, as well as the 20-something other libraries that were found in Baghdad by the Mongols in 1258, who come in and they completely wreck Baghdad. And we'll talk about the Mongols and another time. But sadly, the House of Wisdom, as we know it, was completely and utterly destroyed. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad was not the only Islamic scholarly location. You found one scholarly centers in Cairo, in Morocco, in Timbuktu, which is in Western Africa, in Spain. So there's quite a lot of these places in which you see the transfer of cultural and intellectual ideas across Dar al-Islam. And so the last place that we're going to focus on is Islamic rule in Spain. And so Spain commonly is, believed to have been a Catholic, Roman Catholic nation for a very long time. When people think of Spain, when they really kind of show up in their history classes, they're talking about Christopher Columbus, and Columbus, how he is going to sail for the Queen and King of Spain and try to promote Christianity. And that's all true. But for the majority of the Middle Ages in Europe, the Spain was under the control of the caliphates of particularly the Umayyad Caliphate. And so the Umayyads invaded from North Africa in the 700s, and they attempted to take control and conquer Europe and continue to spread Islam into Europe. However, they were defeated at the Battle of Tours. And so, despite their not being able to reach into the interior of Europe, and Western Europe in particular, they were able to take control of some parts of Europe. And the Iberian Peninsula is one that they did. And so, even though the Umayyads kind of fall to the Abbasids, they do not lose control over the Iberian Peninsula, and they named that region Cordoba, and the capital of Cordoba. Then that's under their control for some time. And being part of the Islamic world, you have Islamic centers there. Like the Abbasids, they were very tolerant of the Christians and Jews living there. They, of course, had to pay the jizya. They were big on promoting trade with North Africa and to a lesser extent with the Europeans. And so there's a lot of scholarly and cultural transfers between Christian Spain and Muslim Spain. And some people even say that this kind of helped spark a renaissance in Europe. Most people give credit to the first Renaissance occurring in Italy post-Crusades, but you can also not ignore the fact that there were significant cultural transfers between the Islamic world and the Christian European world during the time in which the Cordoba was under the control of the Umayyad caliphates, right? Ibn Rasheed, who I just mentioned in the previous one, he too was a major scholar that lived there. And he wrote a lot about, he's a Renaissance man in a sense. He wrote about a lot of secular philosophy, about natural sciences that do have major influences on Jewish and Christian philosophers moving after him. But this is something important to note too. Okay. So here in a nutshell, again, what we just covered, the new states that fraction off of the Abbasid Caliphate, the cultural transfers that occurred during this time period, why Islam influences and Christianity and Judaism influence this region as well. So those are all important things to note. Okay. So just taking one quick more look over the essential questions. Make sure you identify and explain the political changes that were occurring in Dar al-Islam in the period of 1200 to 1450. And then number two, identify and explain the cultural and technological advancements and transfers made in Dar al-Islam in the period of 1200 to 1450. So make sure you take time to write good quality answers. Don't just give me an answer and call it good. You make sure you have an answer, you have an explanation for, as well as examples that support your answer as well. With that being said, we're going ahead and just stop today. And next time we will be getting into the topic 1.3, which will be developments in South and Southeast Asia. Until then, stay healthy and take care.